Hello, my name is Animus of VA Games. Today we're fighting for the Russians in the desert of Operation Firestorm. My gunner again is Sony, who is currently undergoing an existential crisis trying to settle on a new gamertag identity. We're flying the Russian faction's Mi-28 helicopter, which is known to NATO and Battlefield players by its more common name, the Havoc. Ordinarily, I would have Jerry Hutch or one of the other mercenaries flying cover in a jet, but we were very concerned about our team's ability to capture and maintain the checkpoints on the ground. Jerry volunteered to take point and lead Wayne and Dubear on the ground to capture the objectives. We could see the difference this decision made immediately, as we took the objectives very quickly and held them consistently throughout the match. This is also the epitome of the theme of this video, which is to adapt and overcome. One of the most vital skills that any Battlefield player can develop is the ability to adapt and overcome. The details of a Battlefield match are highly unpredictable, as there are many players with many choices manipulating many variables all at the same time. A good player can assess the situation and change their approach to suit its needs. Going into a match with a plan of attack is definitely a good idea, but a good plan is plastic and subject to change when presented with unforeseen circumstances. For instance, in our previous games we realized that our team was having a great deal of difficulty keeping the objectives on the ground, and we were beginning to lose the lead as a result. As needed, our pilots would redeploy on the ground and abandon the air in order to try to retake those objectives. Usually, just redirecting one merc from the air to the ground is enough to regain control and stabilize the lead, but sometimes it isn't. If Jerry goes boots on the ground but still can't secure the objectives, I'll ask my gunner to jump out and assist. I'll remain in the helicopter as long as possible to suppress armor, keep jets and helicopters from overwhelming our infantry. In extremely desperate situations, the entire merc team, including myself, will deploy on the ground to try to regain lost momentum. Assess the situation, identify the challenges, adapt your approach, and overcome adversity. Too many players are quick to blame anything and everything other than themselves for their own failures. Servers that restrict certain weapons, such as shotguns and stingers, are perfect examples of a failure to adapt and overcome. These weak players resort to banning weapons or playstyles that they either can't or won't learn how to actually deal with. These are the same players that use the hilariously abused term overpowered to describe such things. The reality of it is, unfortunately, that the majority of players that use a term like overpowered don't even know what that term actually means. In the Battlefield series, the term overpowered is most often used to describe either the jets and helicopters or the Stinger and IGLA missiles. Tank drivers and infantry will tend to complain that the helicopters and jets are overpowered. The helicopter pilots tend to think that the jets are overpowered, and the jets and the helicopters tend to think that Stingers are overpowered. However, more often than not, the problem does not lie with the weapons or even any other element of the game itself, but the players who failed to meet that game's challenges. Stingers can be just as devastating to air vehicles as air vehicles can be to infantry. The game was designed and balanced with this dynamic in mind and functions precisely as the developers intended it. Now, to be clear, I am not saying that nothing is ever unfair. The developers certainly aren't perfect, and neither are their games. Battlefield 3 shipped with helicopter pilots and gunners both being able to deploy countermeasures, but this was identified as a flaw and fixed in a patch after some time. Sometimes there are errors, and sometimes those errors can and should be corrected. Video game design and game theory in general is a very broad field of study that some people have dedicated their entire lives to understanding. It is both a science and an art in some respects, and the overwhelming majority of players will never be exposed to this vast world. It is far more complicated and rich than they can ever appreciate. The Dunning-Kruger effect applies here. Most players are not competent enough in the field of game design to have the skills that would let them recognize that they are not competent enough in the field of game design. So the next time you feel yourself getting angry at an element in a multiplayer game, consider just for a moment that the problem may be with the user and not with the software. When I started playing Battlefield with Bad Company 2, I started playing as a recon, and I had a lot of trouble dealing with tanks and helicopters. At first, I would complain that these vehicles were unfair and seek out games where I didn't have to deal with them at all. As I learned how to play the game, I realized that they were actually not unfair, and I actually learned how to deal with them. Now, I'm a veritable expert at hiding from tanks and helicopters, and I know how to counter each of them if I feel that I have to. I now understand that the problem was not with the vehicles, but that I needed to learn how to handle them. My experience with helicopters in Battlefield 3 has been exactly the same. When I started flying a year ago, I was constantly being shot down both by Stinger missiles and jets. I tried everything I could think of to deal with them, but nothing seemed to work. I started to look online in threads and articles written by other players to see how they were dealing with these problems. The most common result to these searches was just that the jets and the stingers were unfair and overpowered. After being killed by both so many times and still not knowing how to deal with them properly, I too was inclined to believe that they were just overpowered. However, just like with Bad Company 2, I realized that the problem was not with the game, but with me. I learned how to break stinger locks and shake incoming missiles by flying low and using the environment. And I also taught myself how to use the air radar to track attacking jets, even when I can't see them. I have a richer understanding of the balance of the game mechanics such that now I can use them to my advantage against other players. I have the perspective now to see that I was wrong, and I have the maturity now to admit it. Learn to take responsibility for yourself and what happens to you, and resist the urge to take the easy way out and blame something or someone else for your failures. Now, even if stingers or jets or any other aspect of this game is overpowered, and let me be perfectly clear in saying that stingers and jets and helicopters are not overpowered, complaining about the problem will not bring you any closer to solving it, nor will it make that problem go away. Battlefield players love to exalt themselves as being even more mature and sophisticated than the notoriously immature Call of Duty players, but behave as immature as ever when they get the notion in their heads that something is unfair. I make no secret about the fact that I use Stinger and IGLA missiles. I encourage every player to do so, and almost every single member of my platoon does. I also make no secret about the fact that we use helicopters and jets as well, and I absolutely relish how unbelievably powerful they can be in the right hands. However, that great power does come at a great cost. I have to be just as skilled as my helicopter is powerful in order to keep the thing in the sky against other pilots and stingers. My gunners often get more kills than any other player in a game, sometimes by a factor of 3 or more, but usually never die more than 2 or 3 times. To wield this kind of power, I must have a certain level of skill. Without it, I deserve to die. Stingers are not unbalanced, and their use should not be discouraged. It is a sign of weakness to hide from them. All that being said, I did really enjoy this game. With Jerry and the other mercs limited to roles on the ground, Sony and I were in the air by ourselves. It's been a good long while since I've had to fend for myself in the skies, since merc jet pilots are extremely deadly and thirsty for blood. Even if I wanted to deal with other pilots, the merc pilots will almost always get to them before I have a chance. If Sony, Jerry, or Moneymaker get you in their sights, you likely don't have very much time left. Of course, that is a good thing. As I explained in Everybody Was Kung Fu Dogfighting, helicopters should focus exclusively on ground units. Since I've recruited a few good men, I rarely get the chance to deal with helicopters and jets on my own, except if I make a special request. This is the way it should be, as it shows that our jet pilots are competent and play the objective. It is frustrating as a helicopter pilot to be attacked by 2 enemy jets, while our own jets are too busy trying to strafe infantry on a deployment. Still, it was refreshing to be free of their protection for the first time in a while, as I got a chance to flex a bit in the helicopter as a result. Pay attention to my signature move, the flip, in which I dive underneath an attacking helicopter and do a 180-degree spin. This move has a nearly 100% success rate against pilots of all skill levels and experiences, and serves to give me the first lock in an engagement. I'm very excited to cover this move in more detail in my tutorial video, so it's hard for me to resist talking about it more extensively here. What I can talk about here is another concept that I refer to as threat management. When flying the attack helicopter, there are really only 3 primary threats that pilots must contend with. Those threats are other helicopters, jets, and stingers. A skilled pilot can easily manage any one of these 3 threats in isolation from the others. However, that isn't exactly how it happens in practicality. More often than not, pilots will have to contend with 2 or even all 3 of these threats at the same time. These situations are the truest test of a pilot's mettle. There is no single answer to all these types of problems. A pilot must be able to assess the situation and apply his abilities in order to persevere. In many of these instances, it will come down to prioritizing which threats are the most prominent and attempting to deal with those threats before addressing some of the others. I want to stress that no matter how good you get as a pilot, you will never get this right every time. You're going to make wrong estimations regularly, and they will be fatal more often than not. As long as you're able to take an honest look at those failures to see what you did wrong and attempt to correct it, you're at least on the right track. An example of this is from a recent game of Firestorm when I attempted to come up behind an enemy helicopter without him noticing me. As soon as I started to lock the helicopter, which alerted him to my presence, I started to get locked as well. Obviously, the enemy helicopter with his back turned to me is not locking me in return, and there are no other aircraft on my radar, so I can immediately infer that the source of the lock was actually a Stinger missile on the ground. I also know that I only have 1 set of flares, and only a matter of seconds now before that first missile fires and the second fatal missile gets set loose. It was clear that I did not have enough time to destroy or even disable the enemy helicopter without risking getting shot down myself. As soon as I released my salvo of heat seekers, which alerted the enemy of my presence, he dumped his flares and dove below radar. I dove as well to flee to the containers by Objective Charlie. I was able to successfully use the cover of those containers to protect us at least temporarily from the Stinger missiles, but the helicopter took that opportunity to mount us from behind. I performed a risky 180-degree turn between the containers and started to fly backwards, shooting back up at the helicopter. At that point, I realized that there was also a jet coming over the Russian mountain at us. I pulled up above the radar threshold at exactly the moment the jet flew under us and dipped back down to prevent the helicopter from completing the lock. My heat seekers found their mark and destroyed the helicopter. In the matter of a minute, I went from dealing with a helicopter to Stingers, back to the helicopter, then a jet, then the helicopter again, and then the jet again. That is the essence of threat management. And watch this clip for another example. There was a level 100 and a level 80 colonel on the enemy team harrying us with jets and helicopters the entire game. After my second death, Sony wanted to take up a jet in an effort to alleviate the pressure on me, so I was flying without a gunner. I immediately noticed the helicopter in the distance behind their deployment, which is typical of a pilot trying to safely use TV missiles to snipe kills at a distance, so I was rocking side to side to make myself harder to hit as I tried to close that distance. At the time the helicopter started to lock me, Sony advised me that the level 100 jet pilot noticed that I was back and started coming for me. I backed off the helicopter immediately and tried to slip the jet long enough for Sony to finish dealing with it. As soon as Sony gets the kill, I turn my sights back on the enemy helicopter. I can see on the air radar that he was already coming for me, so I prepared to flip him. I was able to fire my heat seekers, but I took some return fire from his gunner before flying away. I was reduced to 35%. Had I taken any more damage, I would have had to land and try to repair. Fortunately, the enemy helicopter made the very common mistake of using the ECM jammer after I fired my missiles and not before, so my missiles were able to end up killing him. I'm not out of the woods yet, though. My helicopter is critically damaged, and the level 100 colonel immediately respawned in the other jet to come exact revenge on me. Sony attempted to keep him off of me, but he couldn't kill him in time. He makes several passes at me before finally getting my damage to 34% for the disable. Unfortunately, in doing so, Sony was able to run him into the ground. I was able to land and repair, and Sony continued to patrol the skies. Unfortunately, Xbox Live experienced some technical difficulties very shortly after this fight that caused our match to end prematurely. I was satisfied enough with our considerable lead, however, and I do count this battle as a victory for the mercenaries. I was very grateful for Jerry, Wayne, and Dewbear maintaining a presence on the ground, which limited our enemy's ability to target me from the ground with Stinger missiles, which is a very difficult threat to deal with. Of course, Sony performed excellently first as my gunner, and then as my wingman, without whose support I probably wouldn't have survived several of those encounters. If you have a squad that still plays Battlefield 3 on the Xbox 360, I encourage you to contact us for friendly competitive play. If you don't have a squad but would like one, contact either myself or one of the Merc leaders for an evaluation. Since we have an overabundance of pilots at the moment, we're focusing exclusively on recruiting infantry and armor crews. If you think you can fill that role for us on a competitive level, we're interested in meeting with you. Whether you end up fighting with us or against us, I wish you the best of luck. Before I sign off, I do want to thank Sony again for doing such a great job with the Mercenaries intro, as well as with the roster that I linked in the About page of my channel. I consider myself very lucky to have the support of such a competent group of players, and I wish to extend that good fortune to you. And as always, thanks for watching.